All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Addicted Mind podcast. My name is Dwayne Osterlin. I'm your host. Our guest today is Greg Shindler, a visionary leader in the field of longevity and cellular medicine. Greg is going to share his journey, and it is nothing short of inspiring, from overcoming a tumultuous childhood marked by the adversaries of growing up with an abusive alcoholic father and the tragic suicides of both of his biological and adoptive fathers. Greg has transformed his pain into a powerful mission. On this episode, Greg is going to share his own story of growth and resilience, working through the difficulties of childhood and trauma and finding his true self. And he openly explores his path from adversity to impact, delving deep into questions of identity and purpose. I think you're going to get a lot out of this episode. Greg's passion really extends beyond just medicine. He is a beacon of hope and empowerment for those navigating life's toughest transitions, letting you know that it is possible to not only change your physical health from a medicine perspective, but also your spiritual health and your mental health. And he does that deeply by vulnerably sharing his own personal story. And in this episode, we do talk about suicide. And so please, if you are struggling, reach out for support. Help is available. Speak with someone today. Dial 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You are not alone. All right, everyone, on to the episode. All right, everyone, welcome to the Addicted Mind podcast. I think I have a very interesting guest today, and I am excited to talk to him because we're going to talk about not only recovery, but longevity, cellular medicine, all of that goes into having a great life. And my guest today is Greg Shindler. Greg, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, and then we're going to jump into this, I think, really interesting topic.
Well, I hope so. We've set the bar high right out of the gate, but thanks so much, Dwayne. I'm excited to be here, and I love talking about both of those things you mentioned, recovery and longevity. Cellular medicine. So the short version of Greg is grew up in Houston, Texas. I'm currently 57 years old, and my story has followed this arc of adversity to impact. And I'll kind of explain what I mean there. I grew up south of Houston, Texas, in this little blue-collar neighborhood of sort of first-time starter homes, if you will, with a lot of families on the streets. And most of the families had like 3 and 4 siblings, and I was an only child.
And where was that specifically? Because I also grew up in Houston, Texas. And I'm wondering.
It's called Sagemont. It's about Alameda Mall, south on the way to Galveston.
Okay.
Sort of about halfway between downtown and Galveston. There's on the right-hand side, there's an old Alameda Mall. And back in there behind it, were like Perry Homes and all those other weekly homes. Got it. And it was a neighborhood called Sagemont.
Oh, awesome. I was in like Missouri City, near Sugarland, all that area. So grew up in around the same time, I think.
Yeah. Well, you look younger than I do. So,
maybe not that younger, but go ahead.
I love it. Yeah. So grew up down in Sagemont, only child. And my dad was one of the kind of alcoholics they make movies about.
Wow.
He was pretty full blown. If you can just think of sort of some of the worst stuff, that was him. There's and look, I want to be really clear. This wasn't all the time, but as a kid, these are the events that sort of linger and stand out in your memories.
Yeah.
He picked me up from kindergarten and we'd stop off at a bar, and that happened quite a bit. But every once in a while, it might get in a bar fight, or he would wreck the truck in a ditch on the way home. And then I would eventually wind up being discovered by a passerby and then get a ride home in a police car. And that happened, a few times, not like all the time, but a few. There would be just things like that. Right.
Right. And that's pretty intense trauma. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of fear, anxiety, stress going through a kid's body when events like that are happening.
It's funny because my friends used to think, why don't I get to ride home in a police car, And I can only imagine what their parents were telling them around the dinner table. Like, it's not all that, right? And, when you're growing up like that, you're right. It's a lot of trauma. And this is so I was born in 1966, in December of 1966. So, this is late 60s, early 70s. And if we know a lot about trauma and generational trauma and all that stuff, we certainly didn't know about it, right? It hadn't made it to Sagemont, right? In our little neighborhood. And so it was mostly church, go to church and pray about it, or, forget about it.
Kind of suck it up and just hold it in and keep moving forward.
It's really sad, but that's the way it was. And so this goes on, and it was really unpredictable in our house, right? It was uncertain. So I would hide in the linen closet if I knew he was coming home, because you just didn't know who was coming through the door. And this goes on. There would be periods of sobriety where he'd sober up for a few years and then kind of fall back off, or have some sporadic sobriety for a few years. And painkillers came in and all this other stuff. And so, he was a little league baseball coach. And I remember one time, he showed up drunk and was arguing with the umpire, and we had to forfeit the game and go home because our coach got kicked out, and he was arguing with parents. And so he was that guy. And
oh boy,
this escalates, and it comes to a culmination when I'm 12 years old. He had moved out. He had moved out of the house, and it had only been a few weeks, and he had an apartment nearby. And I was out in the street playing with my buddies, and I saw him drive into the drive. So I was driving to the driveway, and I looked up, and I saw him stumble out of the truck, and he was clearly drunk. And I thought, that in and of itself wasn't anything typical, unusual, but you get that spidey sense, you get that sixth sense going on. And I had this gut level feel that just something wasn't right. He went inside. He wasn't supposed to be there. And he went inside, and my mom was there. And so I said to my buddies, I'll be back. And I went inside, and I could hear her pleading in the back room. And so anyway, I wind up on the front porch. After trying to intervene, I wind up on the front porch on my knees, and I've got a 12 gauge in my chest, and he's on the other end of it. And I'm please don't kill me, Daddy. And this kind of stuff going on. And the neighbors have now kind of come out of their houses and are coming across the street, sort of saying, "Hey, put the gun down, Bill, put the gun down." He turns to face them and is swearing and doing whatever he does. And I was able to escape and get between the neighbor's house and climb over the fence and get in and say, "Hey, he's got a gun. Please call the police." But before the police could get there, he was able to get in his truck and drive off. How he drove, I don't know, because he was fall down drunk. But he did, in practice, I guess. And he drove away. And sometime between that night, and that was on a Friday, and Monday morning, he would take his own life with that same shotgun. And I found he had a baseball game that Monday, and he was the coach. We couldn't get a hold of him all weekend to find out if he was going to pick me up from school and take to the game, or did I need to get another ride, or what needed to happen. And so in the middle of the day on Monday, I was made aware that he was gone. And so that's the first 12 years of living under the roof with a really bad alcoholic. And it was pervasive, not like it was in my house, but, with aunts and uncles and just sort of an environment of excessive drinking and, pot smoking and stuff, which you sort of grow up during that period of time, not necessarily thinking is that big a deal, just because it seems like it's what people do.
And when you're 12 years old, what do you do with that? You don't even know mentally how to deal with that. And, it's just so overwhelming on so many levels, and tragic and awful. And then if you're in that environment that there are no models of healthy coping, or very few, it becomes really, really hard. You just have to survive.
And or escape, right? And sometimes that's what we do. And it's not the best choice, but, Dwayne, back then, when you're a kid like that, and something's different in your house, right? Because you go to your friends' houses, and their dads is not what's happening. And so I would eat dinner or spend the night or do whatever like kids do and at other people's houses, but typically they weren't at mine. So things are different, and you feel different, right? So I felt like, I call it now, and I think it's a gift. So when I say this, I don't mean it as bad, like negative self-talk, as bad as it's going to come out. But I call it a broken toy. You're just sort of this broken toy. And we can reframe that as we get older to be opportunities that happened for us instead of things that happened to us. But it's honestly just a reframing of opportunity. But I felt like a broken toy. I knew things were different in my house. And then shortly after this, I found myself moving to a new neighborhood. So I went from public schools and public pools to private schools and private pools and country clubs and summer camps and tennis and golf lessons and snow skiing and stuff like this. And it was awesome, right? My stepfather, Dad 2.0, was an amazing human, not an alcoholic, first and foremost, was a successful real estate entrepreneur, was just was a college athlete and a baseball player, just a good guy, man. He had all the right stuff, just morals, values, work ethic, you name it.
Right.
And so I was blessed to get a shot at life 2.0. But I now find myself, this blue collar kid from, quote, the other side of the tracks, in this posh, exclusive neighborhood in Houston now. It's called River Oaks. And I'm going to these private schools, and these kids have all grown up together. They've gone to school since kindergarten together.
Right.
And the country clubs are a way of life for them, and summer camps are a way of life for them. Just not for me, right? This is all new. And so you feel, again, like you don't belong, like something's different, right? And so I started, like a lot of addicts and alcoholics, I started escaping that feeling, right? I didn't know it. Right. I couldn't name it. I just knew that I was trying to be validated, like someone's external stuff was my internal validation, right? I was just seeking, people pleasing. And so I got good at it. I started to adapt, and I could put myself in any situation with whether I was, hanging out with this crowd or whatever, and adapt pretty well, be a chameleon, if you will.
Well, you have to be that to be able to survive those situations. Like you were saying earlier in the first situation with your dad, I mean, you knew something wasn't right. And, we're taught to hide all those conflicts. We're taught to not let them be seen, and, all the shame. And it's like, how do I survive? I gotta be a chameleon. I don't know how else to do it at that age.
You escape, and so I started, I migrated to the kids who were, on the fringe, that were experimenting with drugs and alcohol and sneaking sips out of the parents' bar, that's how it starts. And then one of the kids winds up with he's got an older brother who, has a joint or something, and then it just starts to progress from there. And I always say to people, I have 2 gears. I have stop and go fast. I don't have a middle gear for anything that I do, good or bad. Right. So as I got older, I had to become a lot more selective about the things I chose, because I'm either at 0 or 100, and that goes for working out, being sober, eating well. If I fall off my eating well, wagon, then I'm eating bad, right? I'm eating donuts and ice cream and sugar and all that stuff.
Very little in between.
Very little in between.
It's like, you grew up in extremes, right? There was extremes there.
I'm just wired this way. And so it didn't take long. The point of that is it didn't take long for me to go deep down the rabbit hole with drugs and alcohol in high school. And so that was in the 8th grade when I moved over there to that part of town. And by the time I was in the 10th grade, the wheels had just come off the bus. I had like a 1.7 GPA. I was sneaking out at lunch and after school and nights and weekends, just getting high, staying high, doing anything I could to just be high and drunk or whatever. It didn't matter, right? What it was. I just didn't want to feel the way I felt. And the irony of that, the crazy part of that is I had all of this, the first 12 years weren't awesome. And now I have all this opportunity. And my stepfather, Jim, loved me, man. He like his own. And I knew it and I felt it. And I had all this great stuff going on in my life, but I couldn't escape the way I felt, right? From the earlier stuff, and which is unfortunate, but that's the way it was.
Well, it's also trauma. That's how trauma works. And,
and at the time we don't really know that, we didn't. Let me just say it that way.
Yeah.
So that's 10th grade. 11th and 12th grade were spent at Marine Military Academy in Harlingen, Texas, where I graduated from. And I needed every minute of that school and those drill instructors, to whom I will be forever grateful for the kick in the backside that they were able to give to me at a time I needed the most. I don't think the way I was going out, I'm not sure what would have happened, but I'm not optimistic that it would have turned out very well.
So it like threw you into structure.
100%.
You had all this chaos around you, internally probably as well. And then you're thrown into this structured environment, at least kind of contain that.
Yeah. I mean, look, with a Marine Corps drill instructor who was in Korea and a big booming voice and who seemed to be 10 feet tall when you're a junior in high school, like, a scrawny kid like I was, it's not hard for them to get your attention, right? I mean, they were terrifying, but they were also they were terrifying to a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, but they were actually just really good humans who wanted to see these troubled kids like me turn their lives around, right?
Right.
And it was later on, I always tell the story, like mine was Gunnery Sergeant Klutz in Alpha Company. And he had this big booming voice and he was just terrifying. But at the same time, you see pictures of him in his lazy boy with puppies, and like he was this really sweet guy. And on Facebook, when that came around, because I wasn't around then, he was keeping up with all of us, and he would see my, children's births or birthday, and he would make comments and stuff. And it was really cool to see it come full circle like that. But anyway, I wind up graduating from there, a couple of alcohol related incidents while I'm there, of course, because, let's get our behavior corrected, but not too corrected. And, it follows me through college. I wreck a car in my freshman year, and it's a problem. There's no secret that I don't do alcohol very well at all, but, foot on the floor, and I didn't stop and let up or quit. And I was able to, I don't want to say manage it, but I just continued to use and escape into adulthood. Yeah. I was able to get a job and a good job and make money and start a family and buy a home. And I was able to do all those things, but I started partying, and then, you get a little money in your pocket, and it's not Budweiser and bad weed. It's, there was Coke and there was other stuff, the bigger drugs.
The trauma doesn't, leave you. I mean, the body keeps score, right?
The body keeps the score. It's a great book.
Yeah, I know it is. It's awesome.
I love it. And so this goes on, for a while, and I wound up getting sober for 4 years in my sobriety date, September 5th, 2017. So this September, God willing, I'll have 7 years. So there was a 3-year hiatus. And prior to that, there was 4 years of sobriety. So whatever those dates are. So anyway, but I'm old. All right. I'm old enough to be learning this. I should have learned this lesson already. But anyway, so sober up, do that. And during that 4-year sobriety period, I mention it because this is important. On October 7th of 2010, my adoptive father, Jim, as he adopted me, I took his last name. He was more of a father to me than anyone, took his own life. Oh. So lightning had struck twice.
Yeah.
I was in the car on the way from Austin to Dallas. I got a phone call, wailing on the other end, and finally could make out what happened. And I have this conversation from time to time. So I experienced two paternal suicides with father figures under very different circumstances. Bill he had his demons, man. He struggled.
Right.
And he struggled. He was a rough guy. Jim was an incredible human, and his health had failed, and he didn't want to be a burden on everybody. And this was like an option. So there was almost some nobility in it, if you will, it was, and people talk about suicide being, the selfish act because of all this, look, and the people left behind. In Bill's case, honestly, I wasn't that devastated. I was maybe even a little relieved, right? Because this guy was no longer going to terrorize us.
That makes sense.
But with Jim's, of course, I was wrecked, right? I was just, I was wrecked. The same act, two very different circumstances, very different motivations and reasons behind. And so I always tell people, until you've walked a mile, we don't ever know what anybody, and that's my story. Yours is yours. And, everybody's is their own story. And so I stayed sober through it. And then like anybody, I relapsed. I stopped working the program. I stopped going to meetings. I stopped doing all the things that had gotten and were keeping me sober. And I was on an airplane to Argentina for business. And they came by and asked if I wanted a glass of wine. And I said yes. And that started the 3-year, continued research project. Am I really this bad? And it turns out, yes, I am.
Yeah.
And it ends at the sobriety 2.0. That's been the last 7 years. Started just after Hurricane Harvey had come through Houston. While it came through, I got a bunch of Tito's because it's a hurricane party and stayed drunk through the whole thing. And it was a liability to my family. At this point, I have 3 sons living there with my ex-wife and I and our 3 sons. And I was a liability. I stayed drunk and passed out, would wake up long enough to try to eat something and fall back asleep. So, and fortunately, our house didn't flood and we didn't lose power. But had it happened, I would have been something else to take care of.
Oh,
and so
goodness.
On that Monday, on the 5th of September, I woke up and I looked in the mirror and I said, not today. I could see the look, the disappointment on my ex-wife's face, on my sons. I said,
kind
not
of
today.
That moment of clarity of waking up and you can kind of see.
I was beat. I knew it. It was game. I was beat. And I knew I was a problem drinker. I knew, I didn't question it, but I had stopped caring again. I had stopped finding my purpose and my why, and I'd stopped living.
Yeah.
And so I haven't had a drink since that day. And, it's been a blessing in so many ways, but one of the biggest ways is there's some lessons that I learned along the way that come in these small little quips that you don't really think about. And so I'll share them with you and your audience. And then also kind of a story about discovery related to fatherhood. And here's what I mean, because I think they're fairly cool stories. The first one, my sponsor said to me, where are you at with God? Now, I'd grown up in the Baptist church the first 12 years, not frequent, not consistent, but, Christmas, Easter, whatever. And some Sundays, when we kind of had our act together. But it was pretty fire and brimstone. And then when Dad 2.0, Jim, he was a deeply religious man of faith and the Episcopal church, and I was an acolyte and all that. As an adult, it was a Christmas and Easter kind of church guy, right? And then as a young adult, my 20s, I was mad. I was mad at everybody, but I was mad at God and all this.
Sure,
so when my sponsor asked me that question, he said, where are you at with God? I said, I don't know. And he said, that's okay. You don't have to know. You just have to know it's not you. And Dwayne, for whatever reason, that just landed. I just went, okay. Right. And it just opened the door, a crack for me to start just exploring spirituality again and exploring this idea and quit being so mad at God.
Right.
And I was like, oh, okay. Like that one little thing. And the other thing he said to me in a different conversation was he said, at your core, like who you are, is you will manipulate, you will lie, you will cheat, you will do whatever you have to do to get what you want. It's who you are. You don't have to be, but it's who you are.
Right.
And I was like, ooh. And I said, say that again. And he repeated himself. And he said, you don't have to be. All you have to do is stay sober, follow these steps, and you won't show up as that version of yourself.
Yeah.
And it was the most liberating day in my entire life. And this is why. I knew that broken toy thing, right? I knew something was wrong. I didn't like the way I felt. And so I masked those feelings with drugs and alcohol. There's no big revelation in there, right? Like that's pretty easy to see. But what I didn't understand was how deep it went, and that it had grown into all these other self sort of loathing characteristics and character flaws that I had. Like I didn't like myself. I didn't like what I would do to get what I wanted. Because when I was active, I drank at a 7-year-old's birthday party. I found a little bag in my pocket at church one morning, and instead of throwing it in the trash, I went to the bathroom and did it. Right? Like that's the kind of addict I was. And when he said that, I was like, yeah, of course, that's who I am. But I don't have to be. All I have to do is do this, do these, what you're telling me right here, follow this plan. It was liberating for that reason, because I knew all those things about myself, and I knew I drank and used to cover all that stuff up. So that was a big moment.
Yeah, totally understand why that is so powerful. I was thinking as you were talking about Carl Jung's work and the shadow self and, falling in love with our own darkness. Until we can do that, we're almost like a slave to that darkness. It has us captivated and we don't realize that, it's controlling the show, but we have to know about that part of ourselves so that we can do something with it and not listen to it. But if we're hiding it, you're absolutely right. It will come back with a vengeance.
It'll consume you. It really will. And I always say, these things that our addiction can, and our trauma can own us. It can inform us. It can define us. It can all of the above. But we have a choice. We get to reframe it, right? We get to take control over what's going to happen and stop being a victim and all these other, reactions, if you will, to it. And the third thing that really sort of landed for me, because now I'm an adult, I have kids, I have a job, I've made some money. It looks like things are going pretty well and I'm sober. And so from the outside, it looks like, hey, Greg finally got his act together. It looks like he's a responsible human. And my sponsor said, where are you at with forgiveness? Now, he knows my story. So he's talking to, I said, I think I'm okay. I said, the two biggies in my life, they're gone, right? There's no closure. There's no loop to close there. But I think I know that forgiveness is a lot of times for you, not for the other person, so that you unburden and you don't carry that stuff around. I said, he said, but what about, Bill? And I said, I don't really think about it, but I haven't been to the cemetery since I was 12. And he said, that's something you might want to look at, just take a look at that. And so I said, and that was on a Monday. And so
nice. The suggestion, right? Why don't you just go look at that?
Yeah, he saw
someone could see the bigger picture. We can't see ourselves. And it's like, hey, you might want to walk over there.
Hey, this is a guy with 41 years of sobriety who's seen it all. And he knows when to use the glove and the hammer with me. Yeah. He knows me better than I know me.
Yep.
And he's like, something you might want to take a look at. That was on a Monday. On Tuesday morning, Dwayne, I woke up and I'm like, I'm going to go down to the cemetery. And it was probably a 45-minute drive from my house. And I didn't want to go. So I knew for sure that I should be going, right? I don't want to go to the gym. This is the thing I need to do next.
Yep.
And so I got in the car, I drove, and I was 10, 20 minutes into the drive. It started drizzling rain. And I was like, you can't go to the cemetery in the rain. I exited. I pulled off. And I was like, I'm just looking for ways out, right? I don't want to go.
I don't want to go there. I'm not going there. It's raining. Yeah,
it's raining. It's a Tuesday.
Of course you can't go there.
3 times I pull off the road thinking, and one of them was it's a Tuesday at like 10 o'clock in the morning and I have things to do and whatever else. So, but eventually I pull back on the freeway all 3 times and I wind up down at the cemetery and I walk into the building and there's this very Texas woman. She's probably in her mid 60s and very pretty and her hair's perfect and, everything's perfect. And she said, can I help you? And I said, yes, ma'am. I need help finding a gravesite because right. I'll tell you the number here in a second. But she said, are you a friend of the family? And I said, no, ma'am, it's my dad. And she said, this is a very Texas part. I'm going to use my Texas accent. She said, well, now, honey, how long has it been since you've been here? And I said, well, you're going to make me do some math, but 42 years. And without blinking, she looks at me and she said, time does get away from us, doesn't it?
Oh.
And this is the kindest thing she could have possibly said in that moment. And it was also funny. I started laughing because I was like, that was the most Texas thing you could have said and the kindest thing because she was letting me off the hook for not coming to visit my dad for 42 years in the cemetery, right? That's what really was in her head, what was going on. She had no way of knowing the circumstances. And I started laughing and then she kind of got tickled and she started laughing. And so this kid comes out. I call him a kid. I mean, he's, in his 20s. And I follow him out to the gravesite and he's standing there and he said, I'll leave you to visit. And I said, okay, thank you so much for your help. And he starts walking back to his minivan. And I mean, it's drizzling outside, right? I'm standing in the rain, not pouring rain, but I'm getting wet.
Right.
And about halfway he stops. This is just a sidebar story that I love. And I think it's funny. He turns around and he comes back to me and he reaches in his pocket and he pulls his business card out and he says, I just want to give you my card in case you ever need to make arrangements for yourself or your loved ones. And he was trying to sell me a plot, right? Like, right. And so I started laughing. And poor guy, had nothing. He didn't know what to do with it. He was like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. And I said, no, I'm not offended at all. I said, man, I love the hustle. I said, that's got to be a really hard thing to do. You know, I mean, like he had seen me back there, you know, he knew this was a long 42 years. And so, but he was going to try to make a sale. And I said, I love the hustle, right? Like one guy to another, one entrepreneur, one sales guy to another. You know, good on you. Said, I'm not offended. And he still had no idea what to do with this. So he got in his van and drove away. He leaves me there. I say some words. I shed some tears. And I get back in my car and I'm driving home. And I tell this story out of order for a reason. About 2 weeks prior to this, before that's my sponsor asked me that question, I was having a conversation with my ex-wife and I said, do you think the boys know me? And she said, I don't think anybody really knows you. And she wasn't trying to hurt my feelings. But it did, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't intentional. Just nobody really wants to hear that about themselves. And I said, well, man, I thought to myself, I want to be knowable. So it's been eating at me. I go down to the cemetery. I do this. My dad, I close some loops, say some things. I've told him I broke the cycle. I broke the cycle of suicide, of addiction, of alcohol. You know, that's not going to be the legacy and the stories that my sons are telling about me, right? And I said those things.
Right.
And I said something else. And here's what it was. When I asked my ex-wife, do you think the boys know me? The real question I think I was asking is, am I doing a good job? And I think that I look, if you said what she said, I don't think anybody really knows you. I kind of know that, right? Like That's not that big a deal. But the answer to the other question of am I doing a good job, if that one goes the other way, I don't, you know what I mean? Like that's a much more vulnerable question. It's a much more, the stakes are higher. And so what I said was, do you think the boys know me? What I was really asking is, am I doing a good job? And that day at the cemetery, I told him, I'm doing a good job. I am a good father. I am a good provider. I'm a good human. I'm doing a good job. And it was
that part, that piece.
It was, and that going down there to explore forgiveness, you know, and say, I forgive you, which I really came through as an epiphany to me in that how hard it was, how difficult it was to accept and to receive that I was doing a good job. Like, you know, there's always this doubt. There's always this, you know, this fear.
Legacy of trauma, right? That we're left with that deep shame, and that deep can be like self-loathing in a way that we're 100%. So, like you said, I am the broken toy. Something is wrong with me. And it's hard for us to be able to see the goodness in those moments, to see, like, you know, especially when the people around us we love so much, and no way do we want them to have the pain and hurt that we've experienced. Like, we wouldn't want to put that on anybody. Yet we're human too, right? We've got to know our dark side, but
I mean, look, we're all just trying to survive and get through this thing.
Yeah. That's profound.
But the choices that we make, the intent, look, I spent a lot of years self-loathing. I didn't always recognize it for that and for what it was. But when I look back, I've had arrogance. I've had confidence. I've had hubris. I mean, I still have all these things. I've had ego. And then I haven't had self-esteem, and I haven't had I haven't been as kind and compassionate to myself.
Yeah.
For many years, for a lot of years, as I am today. And and I don't know why. I mean, I think I'm figuring out why. But it's hard for me, right? It's hard for quote, broken toy. And I don't say that in any, you know, sort of trying to garner sympathy for myself kind of way. I'm just saying, look, sometimes, and I'm loving it, to be honest with you. And what I've found is that having these kinds of conversations, being vulnerable and sharing without any filters or without any expectations or without really trying to protect my image. You know, I have a saying, it's not mine, but I love it. It says, my ego's trying to kill me. It'll settle for ruining my life. but it's trying to kill me. And the reason I love that so much is that when my ego jumps out and is trying to protect scared 12-year-old Greg, and it's trying to run the show, I got this, I'm going to show everybody how smart you are, how cool you are, how, capable you are. Things don't go very well, right?
Yeah.
This big image out here, and things tend to not work out too well.
It's like I was going to say, it's like to come to the situation as our whole selves, complete. Like you said, the good and the bad, but with compassion and kindness and the love that we so wish we had gotten.
I have to share this with you because I just discovered it recently, and it was, for me, profound. And I don't know if, listeners, and I'm sure there's somebody out there who will hear this and it'll resonate, but we can have some negative self-talk with ourselves without even recognizing it, right? And it can be small and it can be big, right? So somebody says, wow, Dwayne, are those new glasses? Those really look good on you. And you're like, oh, no, I've had these for forever, right? I just pulled these out of a drawer, or hey, man, have you lost weight or something? It's hard sometimes. And so we downplay ourselves because we don't do compliments very well. And there's a suggestion that it's because we're not in control. Right? We love to give compliments. We love to give gifts, and we love to say nice things to other people because we can control that. But when they're being given to us, sometimes it's hard to receive, especially if you're not used to it or comfortable with it. So you have that negative self-talk. You say these things, and then sometimes it's way worse, right? Sometimes we don't even want to reveal to other people how badly we're talking about ourselves to ourselves. And I'm working with this somatic therapist who's just been amazing. And so we were sitting there talking the other day, and I said, yeah, but this and this and this. And she said, let me ask you a question. How many sons do you have? And I said, 3. And she said, would you talk to them this way? And I went, no, of course not. She said, would you tell them, get your act together, and you're not this, you're not capable, and that's probably going to fail. And she's like, would you speak to them that way? And I said, of course not. She's like, why are you talking to yourself this way? Why are you doing this? Yeah. And I was like, I don't know. And so she made me get in a different chair and look over at the other chair at like 12-year-old Greg. And she said, now talk to him. Are you going to yell at him? Are you going to tell him he's a failure? Are you going to like comfort him and tell him, hey, it's okay. It's all right. I got you. I got this. And I burst into tears. And it was the first time I really, and I know it's inner child, outer child work, and a lot of people are probably nodding going, it's welcome, Captain Obvious. But for me, this is all new stuff, right? Like I'm just learning this stuff.
And learning it in yourself, like in the body, not just learning it intellectually. I totally get that experience. Yeah,
it was amazing. And I was like, huh. So now I'm catching myself, and how it's showing up in my everyday life now is I'll catch myself, even just on a compliment of somebody saying, hey, you look like you've been working out or something. And instead of being like, oh, yeah, no, whatever, I'm like, thank you, right? Or something, just try to receive it and recognize it and accept it. And then also and I'll tell myself, we're not having that conversation. We're not going there. That's not what we do anymore. We don't talk badly about ourselves to ourselves. And it's making a big difference in the way that I'm showing up, not only for myself, but for others as well. And I wanted to share that. So if anybody's out there struggling with the negative self-talk, that was a profound moment for me. And it was very recent, and I'm not.
And it sounds like you were saying, you're with a somatic therapist. You felt it in your body, which I think is so important. Like we can know it, we can do these affirmations and the stuff, but like you were able to connect to that 12-year-old boy. You were able to do it in I don't know, you want to call it an emotional, spiritual, cellular level that it's a profound experience. It really is, because it's so different. And I can very much relate to your story in those moments.
It's so, I'm new to this again, Dwayne, and I'm like, you said you get into your body and the body keeps a score. We alluded to that book, but we spend so much time up here in story time, in these narratives, sometimes fiction, a lot of times fiction, and we don't stay enough down here to see how we're feeling. And I'm learning, and it's not easy. It's not easy for me. Let me say it that way. And it's work, right?
Totally work.
I've not yet experienced anything in life worth getting that didn't take work or didn't have some sort of effort
Absolutely
tied to it, right? So it's not that part. I'm not afraid of the work. In the beginning, I think I was a little bit afraid because, like, her name's Natalie, and she would say, "What's coming up for you?" Because she's looking at my body and she's seeing me do this. She's seeing me tense